Hello, and it's time for Coffee with Curators. I'm the curator at Riverviews Artspace, Brooke Marcy.
And I'm Assistant Curator Meg Weston. Just like always, Riverviews Artspace is a nonprofit arts organization in downtown Lynchburg, and we're dedicated to exhibiting contemporary art in our art galleries and making contemporary art accessible within our community.
This podcast is just one way we hope to connect our audience with our artists beyond our exhibit. Our guest is currently exhibiting in our Artistic Gallery. She is a fellow professor at University of Lynchburg and a local artist, Chelsea Tinklenberg. Welcome, Chelsea. We love you.
Hi. Thank you for having me. So happy to be here with you guys.
Good.
So our percolator is just 2 questions. Since you were here for install, we got to know everyone pretty solidly during that weekend of installing your work. So what has been your biggest craving during this pregnancy that you're literally almost done with?
So yes, I am now only 5 weeks away, and then baby Tinklenberg will be here. I love this question. Yeah, because both Meg and Brooke helped so much with the install, as well as my husband and sister, because I was 8 months pregnant installing a large solo show.
It happens.
But, you know. And so I love it. Man, biggest craving. I've been it's been a lot of berries, honestly.
Oh.
Blackberries, blueberries, raspberries. But I think also just like salty food. Yeah.
Solid.
Okay.
And then any chance, I get to like throw in the excuse of, well, I'm pregnant and this is what I want right now.
So you haven't gone to...
Yeah, spicy food. I've been wanting a lot of spicy food, dairy, cheese, but
a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
everything.
And when this little guy is in the world, this baby Tinklenberg, what is going to be the first caffeinated beverage you're going to inhale?
Oh man, the coffee will be number one. I definitely miss the coffee.
My sister, when she had her baby last year, in the thick of the pandemic, she was just like constantly counting the days where she could get a venti at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Just a vat of coffee.
Yeah,
please.
I am definitely a coffee drinker, and so the percolator was like, man, gotta be here with my decaf. But I definitely it helps me survive as an artist.
As an artist, it's very essential to have a caffeine addiction, I think.
It really is. And my caffeine addiction didn't really start till graduate school. Did yours start before graduate school, or did it become, was it like intensified during graduate school? Graduate school was my downfall.
It definitely heightened. Definitely heightened in graduate school, yes.
As someone who started in undergrad, now I worry if I take on a graduate program that I may just reach the point of no return and just become coffee.
No regrets, though. It's a worthwhile experience.
It is. And I tell you, just read an article while I was eating my lunch on the importance of coffee and caffeine and how it's good for you as long as you don't drink too much. So.
Yes.
Right. Everything in moderation. Right.
Yeah, everything. You haven't started. Does anybody else drink? This is also my weird obsession, which is kombucha.
I've never had kombucha, but I'm willing to try it. I just forget.
It's the kind of thing that you drink because it's really good for you, and you say, "Why did I drink that?" And then you drink another one, and you're like, "Ugh." And then, and by the third one, you're like, "Ooh, I kind of like this."
I can appreciate that. Yeah. I've had some kombucha. Yeah, it's an experience. You just like,
It is. And when I started drinking it, it was before they realized that the alcohol content was too high.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's another beverage I haven't had since I've been pregnant, but
If you're wise not to.
yes.
Partake. Yeah.
But I like it too, but yeah, I think more for the experience and not necessarily because it's like
I know you're not like, oh, this is tasty.
like yeah, it's a little bit of a punch in the face a little bit. I like that experience.
I love how you put it. I love how you put it because I can never figure out why I drink it.
For the experience.
And I think you just answered that question. It's the experience of drinking kombucha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said.
All right. Time to get this podcast started then, now that we've had our fun. So, Chelsea, the exhibit in our gallery has a lot of moving parts, literally. Can you talk about the development of the work on display right now? That's a big question.
I know it's like a pretty broad question. I think initially so the work started I think in graduate school. My work became a lot more immediate and accessible, I think, in terms of even my use of found objects. In this case, a lot of objects of utility. These are a lot of cleaning objects, but my interest, I think, stemmed from growing up in shop classes, taking shop classes, building things, and being interested in objects of function, so hammers and chisels and and so in my thesis, I developed a body of work with cleaning utensils, with brooms and mops. And so I took this opportunity to sort of expand upon, that initial body of work. I played around with doing, I've got this amazing, like 1940s baby carriage. I thought about doing some baby themed art, but that's going to be next, I think.
You got time.
Yeah, I've got time. So, and then so there's this body of work that I had. I graduated just 2 years ago. So relatively fresh. But then, with the pandemic happening and creating, some new pieces for the work, I totally kind of like I don't know. I'm looking at the work, this body of the work that I made 2 years ago in a totally different light now that we are in the middle of a pandemic. Even just like our relation to cleaning objects and cleaning kind of like containing this unknown or unseen, right? Invisible virus. And so it just happened that, these mops that were like spinning in the air now maybe take on another social context or association for people that are going to be viewing them that I thought was interesting.
Right.
Ooh, absolutely. That's what I find is, if I leave work and come back to it, it has the same meaning, but it always takes on a different meaning. And in that way, I think as artists, our work evolves even to us.
Totally.
I think sometimes people think, oh, well, you finished this series and you've moved, a series develops over time, and as you revisit it, can absolutely start to take on meaning that you had no idea that it when you actually created the work. I've had that happen with a couple of pieces in which I just stopped and looked at them. I was just like, oh, that's what you mean. I was like, but I made you like 7 years ago.
Yeah. No, it's totally true. And I think someone asked me while I was making these pieces, is this a commentary on like your statement on cleaning? Is this a glorification of cleaning or like a disdain for cleaning? And I was like, well, it was a good question. It made me think about it because I think neither. I think my work is not I think is a misconception that, artists are just like standing on pedestals making statements. I think more interested in becoming part of a conversation and creating work that hopefully engages, the viewer on multiple levels. And with my own work, I found more effective and more exciting was the possibility to ask questions through my work rather than make statements.
Cool.
And so, in that, like what you're saying, Brooke, like the work, it's totally, it's open. I think it's meant to be open-ended, and also, have those different connotations or interpretations by different people who are reviewing them.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you ask questions instead of saying, this is what this means, and then just kind of closing yourself off. And I do know one artist who said, this is what I mean. And when people saw other things in his work, he destroyed all the work. He was not going to allow that work to mean anything but what he said it was. And which I was like, that's no fun. Yeah. So I love that you say you ask questions, because questions are open-ended and they lead to more questions.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, with each of the pieces in the show, there's a story behind them, and there's my own memories and kind of interpretation, or anecdotal sort of side stories about the work. But one thing I love more and more is like creating work that's accessible on multiple levels. So even seeing kids come to the show.
We've had a group come through since you've been.
Yeah. Oh, good.
There's all about those moms, man.
Groups of kids, and right, and so seeing them interact with the work is great for me, because like I want the work to be accessible on multiple levels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna skip to a question because you kind of touched on this. Do you see a narrative in this work and symbolism, even if you're trying to leave it open-ended? Do you still find yourself putting those traditional elements to this non-traditional?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, because of course, in grad school, I mean, I wrote a whole thesis about
right.
In fact, I guess on the whole, the more, I guess, art speak side of things, the narrative, or I guess maybe common thread in a lot of the work with these objects of utility, has to do with functional fixedness, which is a cognitive bias in our society that tells us, or that makes us think, okay, when you have a broom is for sweeping, a hammer is for hammering, scissors are only for cutting. And so it can be a problematic pattern of thinking that limits our creativity. And so that's part of what I'm thinking about when I'm having these brooms dance around in the air, an object that you have a very specific connotation for, and a very specific use, and then totally upending that. And so that's not only in the role, I guess, of the brooms, but even how I use materials. I'm using plumbing fixtures and valves and things that, an engineer would be like, that's not for sculpture. And so I think part of the work is imagination and play in the use of those objects. And then, I mean, I kind of can think, more broadly about, our own like patterns of thinking and roles that we put ourselves in society. That would be, I guess, some of the, the narrative, even, the domestic side of, traditional women role, using these cleaning objects.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because that was in my head, and I was like, I was like, do we want to go there? Because that might be taking it in a really total different direction. But it was interesting because you have inspired me. I was out with a friend and her daughter the other day, and her daughter had an umbrella, and I watched that umbrella become like 5 different things in the matter of a half an hour. It became a flying machine.
I love it.
You know, and I was like, this is exactly what Chelsea is doing.
Yes.
You know, it's thinking like, you know, as kids allow themselves to see, you know, an umbrella. We're like, yeah, we're gonna get it out when it rains. But to her, this umbrella was a wheel. It was all these many different things that I was embarrassed to say I don't see anymore. I'm sorry, I don't see.
Yeah.
You remember did other people jump off the steps? You had your umbrella and you thought you'd fly.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
And
Mary
then
Poppins.
yeah, and I'd just been with your work and I was like, oh my gosh, this is what Chelsea's doing. She's allowing us to see things like, you know, as we did with kids when we didn't put limits on objects and assign them functions and
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that with the umbrella. That's because, yeah, that's totally what it is. I'm trying to like free up our imagination.
yes. And I'm sorry, and I'm sad to say I don't know that I would have seen it if I hadn't just been in the gallery around your work and then walked out with her. I hope that I would have seen the 5 different functions the umbrella began to play. But if you hadn't have woken that up inside me, I don't know that I would have seen that. So thank you,
Oh,
Chelsea.
thanks. I'm glad you shared that. Thank you. I mean, I surprised myself too. I will say, like, I never looked at cabbages in the grocery store the same anymore. And a couple summers ago, I was doing a sculpture a residency at a sculpture park in Minnesota called Franconia. And part of we were like intern residents, and so part of that we would go and have it was like a work share trade at a farm. And so actually seeing cabbages in the ground and working with them, we were throwing them in the air to like to the next person like on the cart. It was crazy because it was like my work was coming to life. Like really, there are places in the world where cabbages are being thrown around in the air. I had a similar experience because like, oh yeah, it's one thing to use these objects, but then yeah, to totally kind of look again and
Yeah, and to see the potential in objects, we're too fast to label objects when actually they have vast potential beyond our labels. Hmm. Absolutely cool. Um, okay, let's see. Meg, you want a second question?
I could ask that, or we could jump
Yeah,
to yours. It's up to you.
I think that's a good one.
Well, you find your elements or your hardware in salvage yards. So
yeah.
what is that like? Do you know you need this part and go out, or do you just let's see what parts we find?
Good question. That's a great question. I think both happen because sometimes I'm like, man, I'm really looking for a certain type of metal and I'm gonna like go on a hunt, like a treasure hunt, going to look for it. And then other times, and more often than not, it's just walking through the junkyard and discovering things. I mentioned in my artist statement, but my grandfather growing up, he had a salvage yard, so a salvage business. And so even as kids are running around, like, basically their backyard was just full of all kinds of, we called treasures, right? And so I kind of relate back to that experience of discovery as a child, like looking and discovering objects. And my grandpa explaining, he just has a vast knowledge of all of these objects. Like, oh, do you know what that's like? Pick up this rusty piece of metal that totally just, discarded. And he like, oh, you know what that's for, or where that came from, or the history of this object. And so I think, yeah, every time I walk through a junkyard, I do think back to those times walking around with my grandpa. And yeah, finding objects that are out of place or objects that I'm very interested in just the way they look at or the history of those objects.
Cool.
Color is a part of it sometimes, like these the piece Not for Sweeping on these bright blue, call them blueberries, because in the junkyard they just like stood out like crazy, these bright blue plumbing fixtures in the sea of rusty metal. And so I think color is something I'm thinking of, maybe not always consciously. That color just attracts me.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. But you speak about the importance of humor and quirkiness in your work, and I guess it was actually quite a few years ago, and in a class, I had a student make the statement that art couldn't be funny.
No.
And you guys, this broke my heart. I think everybody heard my heart go. I was like, no. I was like, art is an expression of all human emotions, and humor is one of our greatest emotions and gifts, and of course it's allowed in art.
Yeah.
So, like, so excited, when I see your work, and honestly, it just makes you smile. But could you talk a little bit about the importance of the humor? And I love the fact that you use quirkiness, because if you haven't noticed, you're talking to two quirky people who embrace their quirky.
I love it.
Try to embrace quirky.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned the humor, because it's so important. But I think, I mean, for a lot of artists, myself included, it took me a while to like embrace or take humor seriously. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, because like, especially, you're starting out, as an art student, maybe in undergrad or even early grad school, and you're really, you've really high expectations for yourself to create serious work. But when I discovered and even found art that I was drawn to, it was the humorous work. Art that totally, like I think what you said, Brooke, is exactly it, is art that made me smile. And I think for a while I did fight against it. I was trying to, maybe like would use like playful color, but not really like totally embrace like humor. I had some really insightful professors in grad school that were kind of seeing what I was trying to go after, but they could see it was totally not like, I don't know, committing to the quirkiness or humor. I had one professor in a critique, he said, you're making this work, like, why don't you make work for your friends? Like, make work that you want to see and that your friends want to see. And so I think about that a lot now that, making my work, because like, it's so easy as artists to be like making work for the gallery or for, right. For this, like presentation that's like, okay, I don't know, like a very, more serious way, but like I make work now, I'm like excited to show my friends or I'm excited, for people to come in and smile and see it.
Isn't that amazing? Because I think I went through the same thing. I always have put humor in my work too. Even if I just think it's funny, okay, even if it's my sense of humor. But I had the same problem with going into and thinking would humor be taken seriously? So I needed permission.
Totally.
As I look back, and I was the same as you. We had a great mentor, a great head of the painting department, who a friend of mine was really struggling, and she said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, his concepts weren't there. And he said, "I want to build a rocket ship in my studio." And she said, "Well, from God's sake, go build a rocket ship in your studio." And he's like, "But I can't do that." And she said, "Why?" And he went and he built a rocket ship in his studio, and he has not looked back.
That's amazing.
And so when I think of that, it's I think not only was she giving permission to him, but she was giving permission to all of us by saying, for heaven's sake, just go do what you
I love it.
Yeah. So what
I
you're
love it.
talking about just absolutely resonates with me. Oh my goodness. Same experience in grad school, that like what was I permitted to do?
Yeah, and it's back, I mean, back to, the imagination, right? If we're really, fully kind of using our imagination and creativity, we should like fun should be allowed.
Yes,
But
fun is
put sort of
allowed.
these blocks in our in our work.
Oh, absolutely. And kind of needing the confidence to really be true to ourselves. And I think that's one of the things that you get in graduate school. I think I did, was the confidence to be me.
Totally.
And I think that came from the professors. I don't even know that they realized that that's one of the tasks they were fulfilling, was saying you can be you.
Yeah, totally. Giving you
Yeah.
permission. And yeah, and for me too was just the exposure. I got to go to the Venice Biennale
Ah,
um
so good.
in the middle of our whole cohort got to go to the Venice Biennale, and so even just that experience of being exposed to a lot more types of art, current art. Um, I got to see the art of Irvin Verm. And those of you haven't seen him, he has just like some really fantastic work that is um, he totally embraces humor. And his work is interactive. There's these little tiny like Sharpie drawings that tell you what to do. Um, whether it's like just standing on a cooler or putting your elbow through the side of an RV. He just has these amazing installations that activate viewer participation, but then just totally embrace the absurd.
Hmm. So it's and that's actually what your art did with me and the umbrella.
I love it.
You opened up that world to me at that moment. And I don't even know if we think about the fact that our art sometimes is opening up the ability in someone else to create, use their imagination. So, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the story of the umbrella. I
It
love that.
really, I mean, I honestly am not going to forget that, because the whole world changed for me when I walked out of your exhibition onto the street with a 5-year-old and an umbrella.
I,
Uh,
I think, I mean, one of my, I guess, stories about like, I guess my umbrella story would be my related to the broom. My grandma's like a super strong woman, and so she this is the same um the wife of my grandpa who had the salvage business, and they had an antique shop, but they, you know, out in the country, working the farm, very strong woman. I'm like, remember her holding a broom, but doing everything with the broom but
but
sweeping.
sweetie.
Either like swatting a cobweb or spider, or like she would use it like they had cats and dogs, and so she was always very protective of the cat. So I always remember her sort of like chasing the dogs away with the
With the broom.
broom. But I don't really remember as much of the sweeping, just like her doing all kinds of other things with that broom. And I I love it.
Oh my goodness, that's marvelous. I was reading through and then looking at your artist statements over the years, and I came across the kind of your idea of the presence of precarious nature among objects.
Yeah.
And I really do see that in the show. I see that, and I love how that. I love that in combination with the humor.
Yeah, totally.
So do you see that as well as being that precarious nature of your objects existing?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think and that for a while was like yeah, maybe even before I embraced the humor, I was thinking a lot about balance. Um and so maybe more, I guess, formally or sculpturally, I love like the process of bending objects, kind of pushing their limit. Like how far could I bend a piece of metal or piece of wood before it broke, right? Or like sort of pushing the material limitations of the materials I was working with. But yeah, very much thinking about the precarious balance in life. And so yeah, I think it really did. I think like what you said, like bringing in the humor, it it just accentuated and kind of like brought it all around, because without that there's tension in the balance, right? And so the humor sort of breaks that tension.
Yep, and that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, that balance brings such tension, but the humor smooths it, makes it,
Totally.
oh, it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I when I was in 6th grade, I earned some dog walking money from one of my teachers. I walked her dog, and I bought a unicycle. And
Talk
so
about precarious nature.
yes, and so that actually is something I think about a lot in my work, is sort of, and if you if you've ever seen someone ride a unicycle, it looks very graceful. Most likely you're seeing them like ride down the street. But if you watch someone learning how to ride a unicycle, it is just like, it is so absurd. And so it actually, when I was learning, I mean, and we had a lot of techniques, like down the hallway, you got two sides of your arms, or along a fence, my mom and my brother holding me up. Um, but to really be able to learn to ride the unicycle, I just had to flail my arms around like a crazy person. And that's what allowed me to like be able to ride on my own and like overcome this balance, was just like total absurdity, flailing my arms around.
That's like that chaos.
Yeah.
Through the chaos, you were able to find the balance. But you had to have the chaos first.
Do you still unicycle?
Yeah, I do. I don't have one here with me in Virginia. It's back home in Arizona, but yeah,
That's awesome.
I still I still can ride a unicycle.
It's like we found your hidden talent or something. Like,
yeah, I need to bring one up.
You do. You need to be going around University of Lynchburg on your unicycle.
Oh, the students would love that.
Yeah.
That's this 3D professor. She's on her unicycle.
It probably wouldn't have been a good idea while I've been pregnant. So it's
no, this is definitely like after
that I've left it there. But yeah, I need to get back into it. Yeah.
Is it like riding a bike?
No pun intended. I love it.
There might have been a pun intended there.
You pick it up again. I definitely, like, you get out of practice. Like, I feel like bicycle is just like, yeah, it's like riding a bicycle. Get back on. But you do definitely, I think, I mean, well, the unicycle too just takes so much core muscle.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
That, yeah, I think I'm a little bit out of unicycling shape right now.
Let's see. I have, since you touched on how color kind of influences your choices at the salvage yard, what about in the final pieces that you make? What level of importance is color and shape and line and all those traditional elements? And are these underlying elements that create a continuity in your work?
Totally. I love that question, because I think for a while, like, I permitted myself to make decisions in the junkyard, but not like
in the studio.
Not in the studio, or not at the store, because I mean, that's another thing in my work. I not only do I use objects from the junkyard, but I buy brooms from the hardware store, or from like a fresh, right, new broom online. And so I think for a while I permitted myself, like, oh, I can only use, like, if I find it in the junkyard, then it's like authentic. But I wouldn't let myself like buy objects and use it in my art. But now, yeah, I totally mix old and new, and I have sort of broken through and allowed myself, yeah, like to buy a broom or find a purple bristle broom head. It's totally intentional. I mean, it's part of the discovery too. You know, you don't necessarily know what color broom you're gonna find. But yeah, it does provide a continuity. I think that was a good way of putting it. Provides a continuity in the work. And then also as I'm thinking, more art speak, but yeah, thinking formally about color, line, shape, um, you know, using repetition of color selectively to tie the work together.
Just yesterday, I had a woman passing through, and she saw the lemons that we placed on the other side of the room
Yeah,
near the words, and she was trying to figure out if the distance between the lemons on the wall and the one inside the piece with the two brooms suspended from the ceiling.
yeah. In the produce skill.
She was like, "What is there like? What conversation is she trying to get?" And I got to be like, "Oh, Chelsea just had extra lemons when she was installing."
That's fantastic. Well, I mean,
but like she wasn't wrong. I was like, "Wow, yeah, no, someone could spend some time trying to decipher that."
I love that. Well, I mean, that's what I think is an exciting thing about sculpture in general, or I guess art. Yeah, for me, it's it becomes not only a conversation within, like, right, if you were working on a canvas, it's kind of you're limited to the canvas. Sculpture engages with the space in a totally different way. So, and I think especially in at Riverviews, this just allowed my work to really expand across the space, and not only does a piece interact within itself, but it interacts with the piece next to it. And so I love that color, and kind of an immersive environment like that can create, it's like you're walking inside of a painting. And so there are like relationships, and I love that, you know, she was thinking about that, because it's not wrong that, you know, that there was that association. It's just that, yeah, we also did just have extra lemons.
Yeah. And we were trying to hide an octopus of
electrical outlets.
But yeah, no, it still leads the eye from one piece to another. It definitely, yeah, I did. I thought they worked really well.
Yeah, and paintings do that too. I'm obviously biased as a sculptor, but I don't want to underappreciate or undermine. Paintings totally do that. And I think both Meg and Brooke, as curators, are thinking about that as they install a show of 2D work. How is one work going to interact with the piece next to it or across from the gallery? Yeah. I just think it is cool, like, you know, as a viewer walking into the gallery, to make those associations, because I think it's something we do think about when we're curating or putting a show together.
Yeah, it is. But I agree with you. The difference in sculpture, and that's it, honestly, Chelsea, it's exactly what we do. It when we're curating, a lot of it has to do with color and shape, and how the color and shapes relate to the colors and shapes next to them, and again, as you said, across the room. But I like what you said. I really think that the sculpture is such an immersive. You become part of it. You're not looking. You're looking at it, but you're also so much more a part of it. And I think, you know, when you walk into the space, that's why we're so excited. We've had a lot of 2D shows, and we love the 2D shows.
We're 2D artists. We love
because we're 2D artists, and we love it, love it, love it. But due to the pandemic, we just hadn't been able to put up much 3D work, and to have your work in the space was just an absolute breath of fresh air, because the space becomes the work becomes the space. It's all one, and you as the viewer become part of it all. And it was so nice to have that experience again after it'd been a long time, Meg, since we'd had 3D work in there. So it is a very different experience going the sculpture brings.
Yeah, it's just different. I'm always surprised. Like I've walked in the gallery, over the last few months getting ready to the show, and every time I was like, oh, I always forget like how much a space transforms, even from 2D show to 2D show.
Mhm.
But yeah, this, yeah, I just love
Yeah.
how the space can transform and become something else.
It really does. And in some instances, the space can compete with and dominate the work. And our space is so big that sometimes our space will do that. And that is not a good thing.
It's a
But
challenge, just curators.
yeah, the challenge is curious. But of course, there's no way that our space is going to dominate your work. No, it is. I think they have a beautiful symbiotic relationship. And yes, I talk about our spaces, though it's an entity because, in a way, it is because it does always change.
We do personify a lot as
We do, we do.
curators.
I like pet the walls and the pillars, and I'm like,
I
yeah,
love it.
yeah. So okay, I love that in one of the quotes as I was reading through some of your statements, you use the word hope. And I wanted to ask if you saw this work as being hopeful, because I do.
Oh, that's a great question.
And we need hope right now. So,
Yeah. No, totally. I think I mean humor throughout history has been a coping mechanism. In a lot of ways, we were talking about the precariousness of some of my early or other work or even this work. But the humor as being the antithesis of that precariousness or the counterpart that kind of um yeah when you're
yeah.
balancing writing that unicycle that allows you to come up from the fall. um
Yeah.
and so I'm glad that you reminded me about the hope because I think yeah for sure, especially in this crazy pandemic, um it's there's a lot of work that is being created in response to that and rightfully sort of mirroring a lot of the negative, which is important. But I think my work maybe offers the alternative. And hope is, I think, a good word to summarize that. This sort of light at the end of all of this crazy time that we've been in. I mean, even myself, I talked about in my artist statement, it was really challenging me, like for me when I was teaching in this pandemic, because I'm like, what is the point of art anymore? Right? When you really like are all, yeah, we're the whole world dealing with death and um just a very destructive, depressing year. um but kind of seeing the potential for art to bring people together, for people to realize their commonalities and experiences, and then also, yeah, offer
Yeah.
some hope.
Yes. I think that is exactly what your work does. It has just made me happy. And I think a lot of people happy since the minute you started installing. Um, yes, we have to remember the hope. And it's really, during the pandemic, it's been really easy to forget that. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of us have forgotten it at times and struggled to find it again.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful that your work kind of gives us a little bit of a bridge, kind of back into that state of hopefulness and humor and, just honestly, just plain smiling to something
Oh,
just makes you happy.
thank you.
Um,
Yeah, I guess, yeah, another thing I was thinking about with tension, when we are tense, we hold our breath.
Mm.
And so laughter not only is a human experience, it is a what is the word?
yeah.
It's a physiological mechanism that forces the person to breathe.
Breathe.
And so I guess not trying to, overly emphasize my work, but I hope that
No.
it, in a way, allows to break that tension, give people a breath.
Well, that's what I mean, that's what I say oh my gosh, you're so spot on, because every time I think I walk into your show, I'm like, it's a breath of fresh air. I can breathe in here. It's all about breath. And I didn't
Yeah.
even make that association with the humor but of course,
Yeah. There was I want to do another series of work that's called Globus Hystericus, because Globus Hystericus, and it's something, even I experience anxiety a lot. I have dealt with in my life, and so Globus Hystericus is a feeling of having a lump in your throat. Um, right, that feeling like, oh, you can't breathe, or like, I don't know, that stage fright feeling. But laughter, yeah, physically allows you to break that tension.
Yeah.
I also think it's just hysterical, the name Globus Hystericus. It almost has laughter in the name.
I was waiting for you to be like, break it down, like it's Latin for like and it's gonna go deeper into the pandemic, and you're like, nah, it's a lump in your throat.
That's what it means. It's a lump in your throat. And so, yeah, I think, laughter is a really important human mechanism.
It is, and I think we forget about how important it is, which is, we should never forget. So we had a great conversation one day about the fact that neither of us really make artwork to sell.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
You're telling me about a conversation you just had with somebody about this kind of, this fact that it's always sort of a big question mark to a lot of people who are like, well, why don't you just make landscapes? And I'm like, well, I don't.
Yeah.
So fun if you talk a little bit about that, because a lot of people who listen to this podcast are artists and can absolutely relate.
Yeah. So part of, being able to make the work, I've been working over at Vector Space, which is a maker space in town, which has allowed me to have access to a full metal and wood shop to be able to build these things. And so it's been great, because not only have I been able to use the tools, but safely interact, right? We're distanced and masked, but have been able to interact with some of the community, like peripherally, about the work. I've had quite a few conversations, like people like looking at like, like, so this mop is spinning around. Does it clean the floor? Like, what's the purpose of this? And I had someone like really trying to convince me, like, maybe if I could probably, like, I could tell that you put a lot of work into this, Chelsea. There's a lot of skill involved. Maybe you could turn it into a lamp and sell it. And it was it was like, I was trying to explain that kind of it defeats the purpose of the work if I'm making something intentionally to sell it, versus all these other ideas that we've been talking about. But yeah.
It totally changes it. And another question I had, just kind of reading through some of your writing, was I was just curious, what are your thoughts on social media? How do you feel about social media? Now, I personally have mixed feelings.
Social media is crazy. Yeah. I had a joke with a friend who was really good at like Instagram, and I became later Chelsea because I am the queen of later grams, is what I call them. I think I struggle a lot because like I was getting ready for this show and I realized like, oh my goodness, I'm like 2 years behind on my feed. And so I really realized the significance and importance of it. But I think as maybe like, I don't know, my social anxiety with social media is a whole thing. I think it's an amazing tool and I need to like just embrace it. But I do, yeah, like sometimes like struggle with the Insta and keeping up with it. It's and also as an artist, like the public private is kind of like it's a struggle for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
no, I think it is. It always scares me as I think you make up an entity on social
Mhm.
media. I don't know that that's really you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that to me is sort of I've always thought of it as like a mask. You put this mask on when you do your social media, and when you're done, you take it off, and there you are.
Yeah, totally. Well, and even more so with like even with like Skype and Zoom and Google Meet, I was finding myself um just like even as a teacher because I'd be moving to um we had to move completely online for a little bit,
Mhm.
um, that I was losing my authenticity with the students and vulnerability. And so what I did, like pretty soon, I was like, okay, we're not record. I mean, in some cases we did record if the student couldn't be there, but in general, my practice became not to record so that we could be more authentic. Like you
Yeah.
guys are. I'm not a lecturer by by any means in my personality or my teaching style. And so to move online and then like suddenly be like in front of the screen, it was weird. And I was finding myself like, yeah, just like totally filtering myself rather than like having more authentic conversations. And so, yeah, pretty soon that's what like if you're gonna have a Zoom class with me,
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you like, okay, you're just gonna get the raw, unedited
Yeah.
version of Chelsea. Like we're gonna meet live. These
Yep.
are not these are not gonna be polished videos
Nope.
because for me, that completely was counterintuitive to my teaching style because my teaching style is to take which goes back to I guess some of my work this precarious balance right
Mhm.
requires the flailing.
Yeah, you have to have the
The flailing is required to kind of learn and connect and relate to each other.
Yep. I actually felt exactly the same way. I would get off of um that's why I do very little asynchronous for the same reason. The only asynchronous I do is to write everything out and have it available for people who want, because there are people who learn in different ways, and some people learn better by reading through material and
Right.
rereading and having references. Because I found that when I got off of these meetings, I was sad.
Yeah,
I
totally.
I was just plain sad, and
Yeah.
I still feel that. And I think whenever I get off of a Zoom meeting, there's always that little tinge of sad.
Yeah.
Um, and it's missing being with you guys.
Yeah.
I'm sad I'm not with you.
Yeah.
I think is what it is. So yeah, I was
Yeah,
just
there was an article and I need to like track it down because it was like one of those moments like you're listening to the radio or NPR and like, oh, that sounds really good. And then never followed up or like got the
oh, I
name.
do that all the time. So
But they
good.
were talking about like this whole pandemic and they were talking about it was the aesthetic I can't say it. The
Yeah,
aestheticization of
oh, that's a
conversation
doozer.
aestheticization of conversation and just like how like our view and like of conversation has changed because of this like Zoom or virtual interaction. Like when you're interacting with someone live, you're not aestheticizing the conversation is the conversation. And so this has become like a whole issue, or like even what we were talking about back before, like how much are we filtering ourselves. So the idea of authenticity, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, and it's very hard to be quirky and funny on.
Yeah. It doesn't always translate.
It just doesn't translate the same way.
I did have a funny moment though, like because I would record but not publish. I guess at the beginning I would, because for the students that needed.
For the students, yeah.
Yeah, I would say, okay, we're gonna record, but this is not gonna be like fully published. So it would have a collection of like Google Meet videos. At one point, they're all in the folder, and there's an image of me like across, and I just have the goofiest faces from screen to screen. I was just like, wow, this is what my students are interacting with. So like just like the craziest facial expressions. It was
It's a great icebreaker, I tell you. I think it makes the students feel better.
Yeah.
It's not intimidating. A goofy face is not intimidating, and a goofy face is accessible. So that's what I like to say, because even Meg sometimes says, "Brooke, watch your face."
Well, the thing is, because I think that when I talk, my mouth does just go all over the place. Like in Catcher in the Rye, he describes the girl he likes as being muggled mouth because when she gets excited, her mouth does like really weird emotional things. And I've always related to that part. But if your students are experiencing this on Zoom with you, I imagine, especially because I've been in a studio with Brooke, that you are still making these faces in person. It's just not recorded on the internet where your brain is like, oh. So don't internalize the Zoom for that, because if you're talking like that, you probably always talk like that. I don't know if that's comforting or gonna like wake you up at 3:00 in the morning thinking that you make facial expressions.
I think goofy facial expressions are fun.
Yeah. I mean, I can't help it. So I just, this is the face I got. This is the face you're going to get when I talk.
And you don't really see those on selfies.
No, well, social media is curated. You only get the best selfies. Like, I only publish the best pictures of my cats. So, like, you know.
There's not that picture of Chaz with drool hanging off his fang.
No. I don't put those. I do save those, but I don't put those out.
You filter the pictures of your cat.
Or I don't, you know, put the cat licking pictures up. Like, no. You just everything is polished on social media. So
I love it.
Excellent.
Well, so you've kind of touched on one of the last questions I have for you already, and it's just what we've kind of been asking everyone since we started this podcast in the pandemic is, how has it affected your work?
Oh, yeah. That's a good question. I don't think I'm caught off guard with the facial expression thing.
I distracted you pretty well with that.
I know, but because I think we
gotta bring it back to business.
We had
I mean, part of me, like, even in making work for the show, because like initially, made the proposal for the show almost a year ago, and so initially what it did was it limited. I like more and more in my work, I'm making interactive pieces that, like, there's a chair that you sit in, or like I made a swing set a couple summers ago. Again, like, I don't know, play interaction is important in my work. And so that would be, I guess, the initial effect of the pandemic, is that the work could not be physically interactive. And so thinking about interaction in other ways, the kinetic and the motors are interactive by sight, just not by touch. And so thinking about, how can you make work that's interactive, but not right? It just couldn't be the same during the pandemic with like objects that you can touch or move or levers. I think, the other way it affected my work was just as a maker, the isolation was not productive. I think, for some artists it was, or could be, because, okay, maybe they suddenly had more time being stuck at home. But for me, my work very much thrives on community and interaction of other artists. And so it was very stifling and has been stifling to my work because I wasn't in the same environment either around my we talked about Zoom is just not the same, like coming off a Zoom call or a Google Meet with my class and not having the same, like when I teach, I'm gaining energy from my students, right? There's a lot of interaction that happens. And so through the Zoom call, that wasn't happening. It would just it would leave the call like sad. And so I think my work was like totally at a standstill for a while. Like, oh my goodness, I should be making work. I have the solo show coming up, but it's not happening. What do I do? And so being part of a community, a vector space, even though it was like few and far between, like there would be like, I don't know, 2 of us or 3 of us like in this big shop, but just that was enough. And I think having the prompt of this show was a good thing for me to like kind of get out of my artist slump, because I think, it would be totally a lie to say that I was like, that it didn't totally stifle my work, because it did.
Yeah, I mean, we do ask this question to all of our artists, and the answer is interesting, because there are some artists who absolutely thrive, and for some, especially I think artists that don't work within a community, their lives didn't change that much. They still went to their studios, they still did their work, they still, their lives weren't really altered all that significantly. But I think for the majority, and I say myself too, Meg, I don't know, you'll have to say your side of things. I just have been not very productive.
It's been non-existent.
I've been sad, I've been anxious.
And then you get in a cycle of feeling guilty for not making work.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
The guilt.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, the show is really good for me because it kind of like pulled me out of that a little bit. Because, deadlines are good for artists.
Deadlines are our friends.
And initially I, was also like kind of like going through the same cycle in my mind. Like, okay, what's the point though? Like, what's the point of making this art in a pandemic and show that like, who's going to see it? But I think on the other side of things, like seeing, some good things about like even the fact that we're doing this podcast right now, or just how Riverviews has overcome things and like totally created virtual platform where maybe my art is now more accessible than it might have been. So trying to see both sides of things. You don't have like the energy or like, I don't know, of as many in-person people there at the same time, but I have been encouraged by, like how Riverviews has, still made it like a show and is making it the work accessible to people.
Excellent. But I mean, we have to big thank you to you for showing during the pandemic, knowing that things are going to be different and still giving it 110% of your energy and effort. We can't thank you enough, because without you, there wouldn't be us.
Thank you.
Without artists to show in the middle of a pandemic, we can't really show anything in a pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I hope it cheers people up. I mean, if nothing else, I hope that, because it's fun for me too. So it's been a really great experience.
Oh, great. Well, we cannot thank you enough for taking your time on this Sunday, and it's beautiful outside. I hope you'll be able to go outside and do something fun. Take your dogs for a walk.
Walk my dogs.
Yeah. Mine's sitting here looking at me like,
I'm actually surprised they haven't been barking. I was sure that there was going to be part of this podcast where my dogs were going to totally interrupt the whole thing.
We would have loved a good bark, because mine would have barked and Meg's cats would have been like,
nah.
That could have been a fun thing too. Side conversations.
We could have just turned it over to them. Like, now.
And the animal podcast starts now.
Well,
thank you so much for having me. It's been great. As
Yeah.
always, talking with Meg and Brooke,
Hey, we're
wonderful curators of
thank
Riverviews.
you. We're gonna do it over coffee real soon.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Excellent. Well, try to enjoy this sunny day and keep making work because we love your work.
Oh, thank
We're
you.
your biggest fans, and we hope that you always, let us know when you're having an exhibition. And if you need help installing, guess who's there?
I know who to call. We've
We're
got
there.
excellent cabbage installers.
We're there for you. So,
Yes, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Chelsea.
thank you, Chelsea.